All right, cool. This is Derek, Enrique, and Eric on the static site editor team. We're just having a little chat about the static site editor and what we need to do to kind of get it to a finished point for our V1, essentially, of getting it integrated with the handbook. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. So I set up this meeting initially just with Enrique. I just wanted to sync on some things. Obviously, I'm glad, Eric, you could join as well. So if you have anything to add, definitely please do. But these are the kind of high-level things that I wanted personally to kind of sync with Enrique on. So if there's something else, please let me know. So I'll just kind of go over them top level first. So first, these 3 bullets: HTML sanitization, then just the general chat of where we are with our current issues, like what else, you know, with what I'm working on currently in custom renders, what else, you know, where are they? What's the status of those? And we'll go over that. And then lastly, how can I help Enrique? Obviously, he's been tasked with kind of everything to help shepherd this whole process along. So those are kind of the high level things. So first one is HTML sanitization. Enrique, looks like, I think we might be saying the same thing. I don't know if you want to add a comment there.
No, the problem is that the editor was removing HTML blocks, probably because they were they were embedding videos or an iframe, and that's probably not secure, right? So I think that since you implemented something that is converting those HTML blocks into safe content, like text content, that's probably addressed, right?
Yeah, so yes. So V1 is basically, so, and I can't remember if your comment was related to the V1 implementation or no implementation. So basically we'll walk through that. So V0 is basically what we had, where whatever's HTML in the initial file that's edited, the Toast UI in WYSIWYG mode will try to just render that HTML. So that's basically how, so that's V0. V1 was us actually wrapping it in the uneditable block. And that's merged now. And then V2 is basically, so what V1 enables is it at least prevents you from editing that HTML, but again, it's not like the end game solution, because you could technically still interact with it. For example, if there were buttons within it and things like that, there's a small technicality where we could have prevented that also, but because we knew there was a V2 coming, that it wasn't worth it. So V2 actually converts it, as Enrique just mentioned, to read it as text instead of HTML. And what that allows it to be is it's just plain text. And as such, the editor doesn't interpret it as HTML. And as such, it doesn't render in the various HTML blocks you might otherwise expect. So this is a good blanket solution, I think, for right now in terms of preventing editing. I know maybe, you know, in iteration, people might want certain content to show in line. And then unless we figure something else out, I think we're going to have to go on a case-by-case basis of saying certain subsets of HTML we want to actually render as HTML and some we don't. So that's something we'll have to figure out downstream. So that's just kind of the status of that. So I will, V1 got merged, I will rebase V2, and depending how quick the approval process is there, that'll basically be done this week. Unless the approval process somehow takes a crazy amount of time, which I don't expect. Any questions before we move on to the next one? Okay. And the next one is just a general chat of status. So the last big one was what we just kind of talked about, the V2 HTML custom render. The other one, which is a follow-up, which kind of relates to the previous one with respect to Enrique talking about sometimes the Toast UI editor just removes the nodes completely. So one example, for example, with the V1 implementation was if you had a link tag that was loading a style sheet, you know, in the source.md file, once that got converted, it would get rendered and consumed by the browser. And then when you went back to Markdown mode, the link tag would be gone completely. So I think that's the one I experienced. It sounds like you may have experienced that with iframes and videos and things like that. So again, the V2 solution will solve that. But what that means, I ran into something similar with this identifier syntax, and I can go to this link, I think. So can you guys see still see my, these screenshots?
Yep.
Okay, sweet. So this one, and this is, so this line, this paragraph right here, this is the before. And what it has is this special syntax where it's bracket, bracket, and then optional bracket, bracket. And what this is basically a, this is again a similar to the link syntax, except where the second portion is brackets instead of parens. And in traditional Markdown, that's a link. But in our extended Markdown, this is a reusable link where you can, as you see down here, you can basically write a variable, alert boxes, for example, right here, and it points to this URL, and then you can reuse that numerous times within the content. So that's what this is. Does that make sense? So that's handled down here, but the actual instances of when you use these, that's what I'm trying to solve for right now. So inline, that's why they're still showing up as raw text. I ran into, so this is what it looks like rendered when it actually works. So now you can edit the text. You wouldn't be able to edit just the portions that match that syntax. The problem I'm running into right now is that when you go to Markdown mode, the HTML, the custom HTML that we wrap these in is persisted in Markdown mode. And we obviously don't want that. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time trying to solve that. If I don't, I think what we're just going to, right now, so I think I'll try to solve that, number one. Number two, if that doesn't work in the short term, we're just going to have to leave it like this. And I don't think that's a huge deal breaker. Eric, obviously, let me know if somehow that's not the case.
No, I agree. Honestly, I didn't even know we had this capability in our extension of Markdown. I don't see it all that often, so I'm learning something new today.
So this is something we might be able to, so this is another nugget in the back of my head is, as we continue on this journey, there are obviously some subtle, odd, less known instances that we have to handle, right? And it's like, how much resources, how much time should we spend on these kind of more exception case-esque, less used features? I think it might be in our best interest as an entire team to push back and maybe remove some of that stuff, especially as we're becoming actual owners of the handbook. Do we really need these things? Another one that comes to mind is another one I'm working on for right here. So having what is it called? Bootstraps, basically like special icons. I'm spacing the name right now, but you see it's just a little rendered square, but like basically emoji-esque kind of characters, but it's actually HTML still. So that's another kind of exception case. I remember in kind of the user interviews that some people really like that, right? Because one of the kind of perceived UX problems is it's so mundane just having text, 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 text. So this is a way to enable contributors to have this level of visual, visual breakup, but it also communicates within the visual itself, right? So anyway, that's just kind of another example. We do have that solved right now, but it's, again, another kind of exception case that I think is less used. So that's something we should keep in mind.
Another one that I see is implementation of Collapsible Section,
Yes.
Which is like a custom JavaScript thing that was contributed to the handbook, and it's not really something that's official, but might be something we need to be able to address or pull out. Like if we're going to standardize on something and say, look, I'm sorry, we're going to improve the UX of reading to the point where that's not necessary, but for now we need to remove that custom JavaScript because it doesn't work well. We can get there when we get there.
That's I totally agree. And two things. One that's kind of nice is that when we have those instances, and we can obviously comb our Markdown guide to see where those exactly are, because we have it documented, which is awesome. But because it's HTML, it'll just get solved by the V2 implementation here, which is pretty nice. The second part of that was if we did expect these types of things to render and they require JavaScript, right? That's a whole nother thing we have to kind of handle. And again, that goes, now that I remember, when I was just showing this example of the kind of that icon, it's rendering as a square because we're not loading certain additional stuff it expects. So that's kind of related. But anyway, I totally agree. So that's kind of the status of things, is all the custom renders that were assigned to me are basically going to be done. The V2 of the HTML is going to be like the big one. That identifier syntax I just mentioned is, we might have it solved, but anyway, it'll be in enough of a iteration 1 spot. So knowing that, the last bullet is, I don't know, Enrique, if you want to take over this, like what else can I or we do to get this integrated in the handbook as smoothly as possible for kind of this iteration?
So last week, Eric found that probably the best path forward is to make the static-side editor consistent when with the handbook when formatting the Markdown syntax. So that should be the focus for this week and probably the upcoming week. Modify the editor to adopt the guidelines of the handbook Markdown guide. Last Friday, I updated an issue that is about all of these changes that TOSUI is introducing to Markdown documents. And that pretty much is just the inconsistencies in the preferences between the static-side editor and the handbook. So the way of solving that is going through all of those formatting differences and making them consistent. So what we need to do, where help would be great, is in tackling all of those independent issues. So you see that in the implementation tasks. There is one that is about formatting lists, consistently with the Markdown, the handbook Markdown guidelines. Also the emphasis on both formats. There is one that is about HTML tags. That is the one that we were talking about, right? That you addressed. And the first one that we found was a text escaping that it was breaking the Markdown documents. So yeah, we should just address all of those points, and then we can continue performing the handbook with the static-side editor.
Cool. So just to recap there, basically what that essentially means, right, is in our current source files in the handbook itself, it expects one syntax, and when it gets consumed by our editor, once it goes to Markdown mode, or maybe even before, it converts it to what it expects, correct? That's the main gist. We're not changing we're changing Toast UI to work for our source, not updating our source to match what Toast UI expects, correct?
That's right.
Cool. I just wanted to make that super clear. Cool. So then my next question is, do you know, and this might get into a little bit of technical implementation stuff, do we have a good path forward for, is there a certain APIs or a certain hook or whatever for us to consume this, or do you anticipate this being a hint hacky, or what's your expectation about how Toast UI enables us to do that conversion?
So in the first item, the fixing the incorrect text escaping, I made some research to understand how we could fix that, and I found that we could tweak the engine that converts HTML into Markdown. So the way that Toast UI works is that there are two editors: the Square editor, that is a rich content editor that handles HTML, and Code Mirror, that is raw Markdown. So when Toast UI converts HTML to Markdown, it doesn't remember any of the preferences that came with the document that already exists. So the idea is that we can find ways of tweaking that HTML to Markdown conversion with with some wrappers or adapters that I created. So the idea is that with the other two issues about changing list and emphasis and bold, it's just to extend the word that I started there. We create new visitors here. That one about text node. That one is just pretty much saying, hey, if you find a text node, do this and that to convert it from HTML to Markdown. We need to create one for the list nodes and the bold and the emphasis to convert it to Markdown, following our preferences. Very important is that I was thinking that now we are trying to adapt the editor to follow the handbook's Markdown guidelines, but since this is a product that it should work for everyone, probably we should find a way of doing a dumb version of passing those preferences to the editor. Like, right now it could be just like a JavaScript object and say, hey, we want the list to have some spaces and use this bullet chart. But then eventually we want to scale that to use a configuration file.
Okay, cool. So that answers my question. I remember actually even reviewing this. I just wasn't 100% sure that. So you anticipate all the solutions for those items that you outlined. Basically, right here, this solution, you anticipate all being in this one spot to solve all these issues, except for this one.
And I'm not sure about the multiple line breaks either.
Okay, sure. Oh, yeah. Okay. I guess that's what I meant is, yeah, it's all in one location. That's what I wasn't 100% sure about. So it sounds like you anticipate that one location being where we have all these, and then you added the context of longer term, we want to make it so it's configurable and we can pass this information in.
That's right. Like everything that is related with converting HTML to Markdown, where we can apply the formatting preferences, it happens in that place.
Awesome. So that's great. So what that means too is when I mentioned earlier about the V2, right now HTML is just going to convert it to text. In the future, we could leave it as HTML, and then where you had that text node all caps, we could obviously have HTML block, and we can, that's where we can filter on allowing certain HTML through or certain converting into text, for example, or something like that. So cool. That may not be the best way, but that's a way, I guess.
I just want to say I am excited, and I agree that sooner than later we should try and find a way to pass the configuration to somewhere where a user can tweak that. I think that is consistent with the long-term vision. I can see a future where we have in the config YAML file just a bunch of properties that you can set, or even some preset, configurations that set a bunch of things at once, or being able to override the entire Markdown editor, Markdown translator, just to HTML converter, just to provide your own. Like if you wanted to write a custom one, being able to pass that in would be really cool. Making it extensible, I'm all for that. And if the easiest way now would be to document in the documentation JavaScript block that you could pass in, I'm all for that. But it doesn't need to be in scope for this particular issue. I'll just clarify that as well.
Cool. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Enrique, feel free to add something here. So my understanding is basically ToastUI by default uses GFM, which is GitHub's flavored Markdown. We have GitLab flavored Markdown, which unfortunately also is referred to as GFM, as I understand it. So that's what's been kind of confusing to me, which is the initial GitHub GFM, but with additional extended syntax, basically, is what that comes down to. So probably, and I could be wrong, right, is my assumption is a lot of people will be used to either of those GFMs. And Eric, maybe you have some context here of if we're able to at least leverage the default that they already have, or provide an option of GitLab's extended syntax, and make that such that that is a configurable thing, then we just have two defaults that probably covers the 80/20, if not more than that. I just don't know what other, I don't know. That sounds like that's possible, but.
There is a distinction between Markdown flavors and formatting preferences. So in a formatting preference, for example, it's what kind of
and stand up for a little bit.
Siri is telling me to stand up. You can have, for example, say, hey, my preference is that every bullet chart will be a dash. And that's something that is valid in the GitHub flavor Markdown and in the GitLab one. So it's like, that's a distinction. Like the flavor of Markdown doesn't dictate the formatting preferences.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's a great point. Totally great point. Like, do we have, we don't have this, I mean, we're kind of at the end here, but I'm curious, do we have, is there, I imagine there's a document of exactly what those are, right? We're not reinventing the wheel. So it sounds like it's a straightforward problem to solve. I don't know if that's true or not, but I assume that's already kind of documented, and then people can just choose what their preference is in terms of the rendering of that.
Yes, the documentation that we have is the handbook's Markdown guide, and we are the first iteration will be tweaking the editor to follow that guide. With the vision of thinking that we want to, in some ways, create some open doors for people in the future to set their own preferences.
Sure. Cool. Awesome. That's, I don't know if you guys have anything else to say, but as for the 3 bullets, we kind of covered everything we need, and I think we're in a really good spot moving forward. I think we have kind of a shared understanding too, so. Definitely just want to say thank you guys, and anything to add before we end it? No?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for pulling this together.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yep.
thank you, Derek.
Yeah, thank you all. Catch you later.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.